Good evening, everyone. This is Kurt Dolan. We're at the Breakwater Mega Embassy Church. We're going to look at a third part of our series on Luke's Gospel. We've been looking at the chain of history as it relates to the origin of the Gospels. And this is a very important session today for a number of reasons. We're going to review a little bit. If you're just joining us, you can go back and look at the other two. That'll bring you up to speed. We're going to look at the 24 source theory, and if we have time, we'll get to the origin of the two source theory. Okay, so Luke had multiple sources to draw from in order to write not only the gospel by his name, but also the Acts of the Apostles. So Luke by volume is the largest contributor to the New Testament by volume. He wrote the most. They believe that he's a Gentile, very early Gentile convert, possibly at the church at Antioch, where Paul and Barnabas served in that community. Last week, we looked at the fact that Luke joins Paul and his missionary team in Troas on their second missionary journey, 49 to 52, probably around year 50 or so. We see that by the use of the we pronoun, which is to say he indicates that now the author of Acts of the Apostles is now a part of the traveling entourage. And in that group, we have Silas and Timothy. Timothy, Paul picked up on his way through Asia Minor. Silas had come with Paul from the Acts 15 council in Jerusalem that decided that Gentiles could be saved without keeping the law. So Silas is deeply embedded in the early church, knows Peter, knows what's going on. He is a prophet, a missionary, and he is an authority traveling with Paul to disseminate this new information in new churches. And now they've moved into Macedonia, Greece on this journey. They go down to Corinth, stay there for a year and a half. They leave Luke in Philippi and go back to Jerusalem. Now, on his third missionary journey, they pick Luke up again around AD 57. And he travels all the way with him and his group back to Jerusalem on this long journey. You can look at Paul's third missionary journey and see how that was. We looked at it before. So we're just recapping to see where Luke fits into this thing and appreciate the people that he was in contact with and how extensive his relationship is with very early first century disciples. Now, when Paul was arrested in Jerusalem, he was placed in protective custody, moved to Caesarea, served 2 years detention in Caesarea under 3 different governors. Luke was with him this entire time, which means he had plenty of time to meet people, to access eyewitness information for those 2 years. And who knows that he didn't compose a large part of his gospel at that time, or at least compile all the pieces for it from this trip that he took there with Paul. And then later, he was with Paul for another 2 years in Rome. 57 to 59, traveled to Rome and remained with Paul for the last apparently 10 years of his life until Paul was executed around AD 67. So what we find out is Luke had an extensive range of Christian eyewitnesses from the early first century. All right? Now, we reviewed that. We looked at it. We're going to look at some bullet points of his eyewitnesses' accounts so we understand the sources that he drew from. But he also had some connections with this Roman official, Theophilus, to whom the gospel and the Acts of the Apostles were addressed. Not only does it have significant apostolic doctrine in the Gospels and in Luke and in Acts of the Apostles, but also it has tremendous apologetic benefit, as I explained before. So anyway, let's go. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. He writes himself into this as one of the witnesses of some of the things that have been fulfilled. They were handed down to us by those who from the first were what? Eyewitnesses. So if he's there from 57 to 59 in Jerusalem and Caesarea in that particular area, that's only about 25 years after the resurrection. Let's say that it's 30, okay? The resurrection, AD. This is 57, that's 27 years. Roughly, pretty close. There are a tremendous amount of eyewitnesses that are still alive, obviously. So he carefully investigated everything. And he investigated from written accounts and from eyewitness sources. So he goes, I am going to write to you an early account as well. So you can know what? Certainty of things. So he's writing this treatise to Theophilus, who could be a key official in Paul's trial. And this is like a deposition. This is like evidence that he's going to present to Theophilus. So first of all, I want you to understand what many means in every language. Countless, multitude, an abundant number, numerous, relatively large quantity, plenty, great deal, great number of, extensive. Check this one out. Ready? An indefinite number. Keep that in mind as we move through this, because Luke says, I have an indefinite number of written documents that date back to the very beginning by eyewitnesses. They taken in hand means to put something in a literary sense. He says, I'm going to set in order, I'm going to compose a written narrative, a report to write in detail. Okay? So he's going to write carefully what has taken place. Let's go back quickly. So many have undertaken to draw up an account of these things. So he is now going to write an orderly account. Okay? Eyewitnesses mean this, and it's important, we'll come back to it, but understand what it means to be an eyewitness and why this is such a key word, especially today with the modern source theories. Seeing with one's own eyes. Do I even have to explain that to you? Self-seeing. Someone who has personally seen an event happen. And as a result, they can give evidence to the occurrence of an event. There's nothing better than eyewitness testimony in a court of law. How important is that? This is not second generation information. This is not people further on down the line. He says, I'm in a position to actually have an abundance of written accounts circulated about Jesus from those who are eyewitnesses from the very beginning. And that's only like 25 years ago or so. Now pay attention here, please, ladies and gentlemen. But not all versions of the life and teaching of Jesus were accurate historically. There were lies told about Jesus. There are lies told about him, the nature of his ministry, the use of his miracles. Jesus was casting out demons, and they said, you're casting them out because yours is the power of Satan. All right. So, for instance, considering the resurrection, there was a twisted government spin. We've been through this before, but on the Sunday of the resurrection, the women on their way to visit the tomb to treat the body of Jesus because they buried him in a hurry, weren't able to fulfill their Jewish custom. So in the meantime, Jesus has been raised from the dead, the stones rolled back, the guards have fainted, and they went into the city to report to the chief priests everything that happened. So They had a guard stationed at the tomb for the specific purpose of preventing the apostles from stealing the body. That was the reason. Take a guard the tomb. They sealed it. The guards are there. The body's gone anyway because of the resurrection. So they met with the head honchos, the religious leaders, the political leaders, civil leaders, chief priests, told them what would happen. And then the chief priests met with the elders, the Sanhedrin elders, and they devised a plan. So instead of rejoicing that Jesus has been raised from the dead, they devise a plan. And they're going to bribe the guards to say this story. Here's the spin. His disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. Okay, what's wrong with that picture? Everything is wrong with the picture. If this report gets to the government, will satisfy him, keep you out of trouble. So the soldiers took the money, did what they were instructed, and this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. That was the competing story. Now, if you believe in the stolen body theory, I will bet you believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. All right? The guards went to sleep. It was the first night they went to sleep. First light, they didn't have the camera on. It's like, are you kidding me? Your one job is to protect him. You didn't even do it. The entire Roman soldiers, the guards fell asleep. Yeah, that's believable. So here's the story or the narrative that was widely circulated, which means it's reported thoroughly, it's blazed abroad. They're going to get this information out because they have to counteract the preaching of the apostles, who by now are filling up Jerusalem with the gospel of the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead and the forgiveness of sins. So this is the first competing narrative with the apostles' gospel. And this was told by the very people who crucified Christ. Okay? So how reliable is this story? You in the back. Not very good. These are corrupt leaders. They circulated the story that the apostles stole the body of Jesus. And therefore that the apostles fraudulently created the resurrection hoax. So here's some test questions. Are you ready? All right. Should we believe anything the crooked political elite have to say about the life and ministry of Jesus Christ? Should you believe anything? No. What if they wrote commentaries? What if they wrote books filled with quotes from other people and published those books? Should you believe that those would be accurate and truthful renditions of Jesus' teaching? No. There couldn't be one thing that they would say about Jesus that we could trust. True or false? True. Okay. Could we trust anything they would say about Jesus or the Gospels? Should we even be interested in anything they say, no matter how well researched, no matter how well articulated? Should we? No. What value is there in experts' opinion that contradict the apostles and eyewitnesses to the life and ministry of Jesus Christ? What value can we give to that expert opinion? Zero, ladies and gentlemen. Believe me, the stolen body theory is a doctrine of demons. Pure and simple. People who deny the resurrection and who deny the deity of Christ cannot be trusted to tell the truth about anything, let alone the Gospels or the rest of the New Testament. It's not even worth attempting to defend the resurrection and the deity of Christ against these people. You're throwing pearls on their foot, right? So now, jump ahead 1,700 years. In the Enlightenment, beginning in the late 1700s, a renewed attack against Jesus in the New Testament was launched again by those who deny Christ. The newest war against the Bible was initiated by those who actively promote the narrative that the apostles fabricated the New Testament Jesus for selfish purposes. it would be a waste of time to adopt any view of Jesus in the Gospels that these people would promote. Why would you trust anything they would say about Jesus or the Gospels? Why would you? No one should. No one should. So back to the chief priests and the dishonest elite. They're not interested in understanding truth. They're only interested in subverting truth to maintain their wealth, their power, their positions. If you remember, after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, instead of rejoicing over such a powerful and amazing miracle, they devised a plan to kill Jesus. Can you imagine? So the political leaders, the religious leaders, the priests, the Pharisees, the theologians, the teachers called the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish Supreme Court, 72. And he said, if we let him go on like this, what are we going to do? They'll take away our place and our nation. What are they concerned about? That the Romans will come and take their positions away from them. All right? So we should not trust so-called theologians, philosophers, or priests whose only self-interest, even in religion, is to maintain power at all costs and position. Does that happen? All the time. Listen to me. We should not trust anyone who is not born again to teach the church about the Gospels. Listen to what Jesus said. I tell you the truth, unless you're born again, you cannot see the kingdom of God. You are blinded. It's not a matter of superior education. It is blind leading the blind.
Yes.
The New Testament was written by spirit-filled believers for spirit-filled believers. It's born-again literature for born-again people. However, a major part of the conservative church today bought into the synoptic problem source theories that were created by Antichrist scholars. Markan priority, the two-source hypothesis, is accepted and promoted as true in conservative Christian commentaries in schools. That's what you learn if you go to Bible college today. That's what I learned in Bible college 45 years ago. I was working on my BA long before this. So they cannot be trusted on this solution to the synoptic problem. It's a wrong solution.
Mm-hmm.
Luke goes out of his way to certify his account, his evidence. It's based on the testimony of endless, earliest eyewitnesses from the beginning. Many of his eyewitnesses had personal and direct contact with Jesus Christ. The very definition of eyewitness is someone who has personally seen an event with one's own eyes and able to give evidence to the occurrence of such an event. Okay, keep that. Are you ready? Luke, all by himself, was able to research the history of Jesus Christ from a wide range of living witnesses from Jerusalem, Antioch, Caesarea, Asia Minor, Greece, and Rome, maybe more parts. Luke was able to purchase pen and ink and paper. He composed a magnificent 2-volume set for publication. It didn't take Luke 30 years to investigate eyewitnesses and to publish his gospel masterpiece. Mark, all by himself, was able to publish at his own expense the gospel that Peter preached. 2 solitary people were able to create an authoritative account of the life of Jesus Christ. That agrees completely 100%. Luke by careful research, Mark from memory of Peter's preaching. It is beyond the stretching point of credulity to fantasize that the apostolic church, full of eyewitnesses, did not create an authoritative vademecum, or a summary of apostolic doctrine. It's a fancy word, learned it. You might as well have it, right? It's a guidebook, it's a handbook. It's a manual carried around and constantly referred to often. We've already seen that Bartholomew had a copy of Matthew's gospel, took it with him to India. Do you suppose he's the only person that had that? No, it is the authoritative dossier of the life of Jesus Christ, circulated instantly as we learn from history. So, the apostles had just spent 40 days with the resurrected Savior. They touched the wounds of the crucified Christ. They received the mandate to go into all the world and preach the gospel, which they did and gave their lives doing so. How selfish is that? For a lie supposedly they created. They had received the long-promised baptism with the Holy Spirit. They did not need to interview eyewitnesses. The 12 apostles were eyewitnesses, and Jerusalem was full of eyewitnesses. The Christian movement began among eyewitnesses to the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. On the day of Pentecost, Peter appeals to the eyewitnesses in the crowd as a basis for accepting the truth about Jesus Christ. He preached this sermon. Listen, Israel, Jesus of Nazareth, a man accredited by God, by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know. Who are these people? They're Jewish eyewitnesses, personally in contact with the life and ministry of Jesus Christ, who are familiar with his teaching, familiar with his miracles, signs, and wonders. And as a result of that, the Christian movement was begun in Jerusalem as a result of this first sermon preaching Jesus Christ and him resurrected from the dead. Immediately that day, 3,000 people were added to their number. Let's say around 30 AD. How many is 3,000? That's a lot. The number grew 5,000. And after that, it just kept growing and growing and growing worldwide until it turned the world upside down. So now you have a church with 5,000 men, not counting women, etc. So it, in my opinion, would be of a foremost importance to create a concise summary of the life of Jesus Christ so that you can have it and clarify his messianic credentials for those who live in a confused state about what the Messiah was supposed to do. No one believed that the Messiah was supposed to suffer on the cross and be raised from the dead. So now you have to publish this life of Jesus and get it out there just as soon as possible so that you have proof from your own scriptures who Jesus is, according to Hebrew scriptures. They would publish that immediately. They wouldn't wait. Why would they? And then, of course, they have to contend with the false teaching that the resurrection was a hoax. So now they have to mitigate that. So not only do you have the 12 apostles, but you have 5,000 Jewish eyewitnesses who publish a gospel according to history unanimously known as Matthew's gospel. It would be in their own language. It would be translated and disseminated, as we find previously in the sessions that we've had, is exactly what happened. There would be an urgency to do this. There'd be a requirement to do it. To publish this, to clarify the scriptural basis for the account of Jesus, their own Messiah. Now, the new theory of gospel origins begins in the Enlightenment, late 1700s, with anti-Christ philosophers. They deny Christ in every regard. We have no valid reason to believe anything they should tell us about the Bible. Why should we? Don't care. It's the spawn of Enlightenment, Antichrist gospel critics. Check it out. We've looked at this before. We'll go over it real quickly. Late 1800s. This is after the Reformation period, which was an incredible disaster, in my opinion, in Christian history. Not much Christian about the Reformation period, okay? So there's a reaction to this, which is an anti-religion, an anti-God movement. So Hermann Reimarus, a German theologian and philosopher of the Enlightenment, began to look at the Bible from a naturalistic point of view. So he began the quest to uncover the so-called historic Jesus. So if we believe in naturalism, there are no miracles, there's no walking on waters, there's no resurrection, there's no atoning sacrifice, there's no virgin birth. All that just gets jettisoned. Therefore, Jesus is just Johnny Appleseed, a nice guy walking around telling stories. Okay? But it's even worse than that. It's not even that Jesus was just a sage going around telling jokes at dinner parties. Jesus is actually a fraud, according to Reimarus. Now, this is just the encyclopedia level understanding, but it shows that in everywhere you turn, this is what they are saying about Reimarus. If somebody wants to dig in deeper to it and find some more information, I'd be happy for you to do that for me. So, Reimarus, novel. What does novel mean? Okay? It means original, new, fresh, different, innovative. So he made an innovation. Jesus was just afflicted with messianic illusions. After his death, his body was stolen. Where have you heard that before? Can you believe the same old lie being told over and over again? It doesn't go away. It worked a long time ago. We'll try it again. It's still circulating to this day. And his body was hidden by his disciples. Come on, you kidding me? If that was true, you'd arrest the disciples, beat them up, force them to tell you, show you where the body is, parade down the streets of Jerusalem. End of story, right? Nobody. To maintain the resurrection, which is not even in their worldview, as we talked about before. And he consistently denied miracles, okay? In Will Durant's famous series, he talks about Reimarus attacked the Gospels as the deceitful work of Jesus' followers. Now check it out. This guy calls Jesus' followers, the Gospels, a deceitful work. What's he calling them? Liars. Liars. They created the accounts to depict him as the Savior of humanity. Is Jesus the real Savior of humanity? No, they depicted him as the Savior. Williston Walker, big history guy. The writers of the Bible were not even honest men. Can you imagine you can even say this and receive a hearing in the Christian church by people who called Jesus and the apostles liars? On and on. Nicholas Capaldi, Reimarus.
Selfish about,
I know. How's the selfishness?
Yeah.
Selfishness. Will they make money? They got homes by the Mediterranean. Do they own islands? The resurrection and miracles were a conscious fraud on the part of the apostles. Okay? Conscious fraud. How bad is that? He denied the supernatural origin of Christianity. He was the first to investigate the historic Jesus. No, to create this fake Jesus, right? A non-Jesus. Jesus was a mortal Jewish prophet. How's he a prophet if he's a fraud? The apostles founded Christianity separate. And the Christianity that the apostles founded is different than the religion of Jesus' own ministry. So it doesn't even flow out of the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. They just made it up. They just make up all kinds of stuff. Christianity is a fabrication. What does that mean? A manipulation of facts. Absolutely not true. Now check this out. The writers of the New Testament and Jesus serve their own selfish ambitions. How did it help Jesus, ladies and gentlemen?
Get killed.
An amazing combination of fraud and enthusiasm. Okay? Again, another one. It's just like you go on and on and on. It's all the same thing, right? Jesus was human, messianic illusions. His body was stolen to maintain the myth of his resurrection, which only ended up getting all of them killed, imprisoned, tortured. The writers and Jesus, they were not teaching true religion, but it was selfishness, conscious fraud, and the Bible should be studied as any other historical work are studied, which we don't have any problem with that. Study it like it's a piece of historic work, right? So, according to the father of the historic critical method, this new method, okay, this novel approach to studying the Bible, the original conspiracy theory was created by the apostles to deceive the entire world about Jesus. They did a great job, didn't they? Can you imagine these little fishermen doing such a great job? Look how smart they are. So the apostles designed the greatest hoax ever with their expert and complicated resurrection fraud. They stole the body and made this fraud and perpetuated it on the world for selfish reasons. How much of that is believable? Why is it even in an encyclopedia? So the stolen body theory is not new. It's not clever. It's an old one. They were bribed to lie, right? The officials, the guards. Mm-hmm. So the apostles were rewarded for their Christ fairy tale by being brutally tortured and murdered. How smart is that? If you're so smart to make this genius Jesus, who has radically transformed everything on our planet for good, how are you so stupid to get yourself killed over that? That's not selfish. This is their reasoning. This is your top reason. These are your top philosophers and theologians. This is all the best they have to offer against the biblical Christ. So the so-called philosopher who founded the naturalistic critique of the New Testament called Jesus and the apostles deceitful liars and frauds. Can he be trusted? Should anybody trust him? But it builds from there, snowballs into the anarchy and the chaos that reigns in Christian conservative theology today. And we've done this before. I'm just going to recap for those joining with us so you can see the severity of this particular situation. So the late 1700s, again, into now the 1800s. Lockman, the founder of Textual Criticism, looking at the text itself. There's really no problem with textual criticism. It's great. It's just by how you use it and where you start from and where you go with it, right? We want the best text possible. So he was the first to allege the priority of Mark. What does that mean? Is that Mark is the first gospel written. But we have studied history and we have every conceivable evidence that shows Matthew was written first and early. So this whole point that Mark is first really upsets the order of everything. Mm-hmm. So he attempted to show that Matthew and Luke used Mark as a basis. Okay? Yeah. Matthew and Luke also share 235 verses in common that are not in Mark. Okay? They've given this a name. What do they call it? The Q source. Q is from the German word for source. Quelle. So Q is used to identify the shared material in common between Matthew and Luke. Okay? So the source for Matthew and Luke is Mark and Q. This is the birth of the two-source hypothesis. However, this Q source is hypothetical. It's created by scholars to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Okay? The priority of Mark, or Mark first, is a novel invention, and it wasn't until the end of the 19th century, which is the 1800s, early 1900s, before it was popularized. Okay? Now check this out. This theory, Mark and priority, two-source theory, reversed the traditional view. Okay? Reversed it. Should we be going in reverse? Or should we be going forward? Right?
Yeah.
Who drives your car in reverse? So this is the agreement. The critical agreement means among scholars, or those people who consider themselves scholars, or those people who consider themselves the descendants of this particular view, initiated the novel treatment by Ramarus. Mark and priority, the two-source hypothesis. The two-source hypothesis, the Gospel of Mark and Q, are the two sources for Matthew and Luke. Would you be able to get that on a test, ladies and gentlemen, if I asked what the two-source hypothesis was? Q and Mark. That's what it is. Now, here's the other thing that comes along this, the corresponding idea, in that Mark, Q, Matthew, Luke were all affected by the theological views and needs of the early church, which means they're not really telling you the truth about Jesus Christ. They're telling you what the early church needed to hear, affected by the needs of the early church. So this is what the two-source hypothesis looks like in a diagram. Mark first, Q somewhere around there. Q finds its way into Luke and Matthew. Mark finds its way into also Matthew and Luke. Okay? That's what it is. Two-source hypothesis. So according to the new view, Mark is first, written somewhere around 60 or 70. Matthew is written somewhere around 80 to 110 by anyone other than Matthew. In this theory, Matthew is not the author of his gospel. Matthew did not write his gospel. Maybe Matthew wrote Q. Q is blah, blah, blah. So now they've got Q commentaries and all kinds of stuff. So what this does is leave a 30 to 40-year gap, which they need for this theory of the embellishment of the life of Johnny Appleseed to become Jesus Christ. The transformation of the Jewish sage into the Jesus of the Bible needs this 40 years of legends and forms and stories and pagan myths to be accumulated to the point that they find their way into the New Testament Gospels as we see them now. Now, these are non-Christian scholars, non-Christian Bible scholars in the day conclude that the authors reinterpreted, right, the historical non-messianic Jesus, like I say, into the glorious, mythological, according to them, supernatural Messiah of faith. And the church did this for the needs of the church, the writers, the gospel writers, right? Did this for the needs of the church. So it's not even a true summation of the life of Jesus according to his people. So this two-source theory is the assured result of modern scholarship, this trend, okay? Late 1700s to the early 1900s. So their premise is this, that Luke had only two sources, the mythic Q document and Mark's gospel. But what's the problem with that?
Many sources.
Luke tells us that he had bountiful sources, right? This problem is glaring. Already the two-source theory has a major problem. So in 1924, B.H. Streeter wrote a book where he introduced the concept of L source. He gave it a name for the unique material in Luke, and he called the unique material in Matthew the M source. So now we have Mark, Q, M, and L. What's that? 4 sources. Now this L source, Luke's unique contribution, that is not in Matthew's, not in Mark, it's only in Luke. Luke alone has these stories. It's got the nativity stories. It's got numerous additional parables not found in Matthew or Mark. Let's look and see if I have a chart down here. Unique material. Okay, so all of this is material unique to Luke. So we can see, of course, the dedication of Theophilus. He's got Gabriel and Zechariah, Mary and Elizabeth, Mary's song, the whole story of the birth of John the Baptist, Zechariah, the angels, the circumcision of the temple, the story of Jesus being lost in the temple, a different genealogy than Matthew has, all of these things, the 72 being sent out on a mission trip. He loves Mary and Martha. He's got stories from Mary and Martha, about Mary and Martha. All bunch of parables, 15 parables, they say, or more. Little story of Zacchaeus, the 2 thieves on the cross. He's got that. And an additional court case before Herod, all right? And the ascension, all right? All kinds of stuff. Unique to Luke. So Luke's not a follower of Jesus Christ. Where does he get all this information? Where does he get it? He tells you where he got it. He got it from eyewitnesses. Yeah. He got it from written things that had been handed down from eyewitnesses from the beginning, written things written down by eyewitnesses from the very beginning, and eyewitness testimony. Yeah. Not only does he have things written by eyewitnesses from the beginning, but he has eyewitness testimony. Mm-hmm. These parables have to come from eyewitnesses. Mm-hmm. Luke's not making them up. Eyewitnesses is plural, right? Plural means more than 2. Does Luke have more than 2 sources? Luke combines many with written narratives, many written narratives. Now, let me ask you a question. In no human language does many ever mean 2, except in the language of biblical scholars. In the commentaries, many means 2 sources. Oh, 3 now. He's got L. Then later, Streeter expands the sources to 4. 4. So what's wrong with these people? In no human language does many mean 4, except in the chaos of so-called biblical scholarship. This whole theory should be thrown out immediately. You have a choice to make between who's lying to you. The people who deny Christ, the people who deny his resurrection, or Luke. Why do we accept it so easily when they accuse Luke of lying? Why do we accept it so readily when they accuse the apostles and Jesus Christ himself of lying? So now the accusers of the brethren are going to explain to us exactly how the Gospels originate And in order to do that, they have to jettison and dismiss every bit of church history about the origin of the Gospels. They have to twist it, turn it, manipulate it until it is an absolute chaos. Go back and watch my first sessions on this. Luke mentioned that his research included many written documents, many eyewitnesses, and oral testimony from ministers of the word and ministers of the word. Okay? That's at least 3, right? If you count written documents as 1, and eyewitnesses as 1, and ministers as 1, that's at least 3 sources. Except that all the words are plural, and many means abundantly more than one in any languages, and eyewitnesses are plentiful in Luke's lifetime. Luke's not 2nd century. Luke's not 3rd century. Luke is early 1st century. And Luke is surrounded by ministers of the word and eyewitnesses himself. Check this out. Are you ready? There was never a time in the history of the world when there were only 4 sources for the gospel. Are you kidding me? And that's scholarship?
No.
Who can believe that all Luke and Matthew had was 2 or 3 sources? Who can believe that? How is that even possible to believe? Now picture Luke at his writing table with 2 sources and then writing to Theophilus that he had an abundance of documents to choose from and countless eyewitness testimony. The apostles themselves are 12 sources. There's 120 in the upper room. That's an additional 100 sources. The entire city of Jerusalem is full of Passover pilgrims by the thousands and thousands and thousands who witnessed the life and crucifixion of Jesus Messiah, who witnessed his miracles and his signs and wonders in his ministry. Many of the people in the crowd that day were healed by him. There were cities and towns that Jesus taught and healed people by the thousands, performed miracles, fed people by the thousand, crowds and crowds of people for sources for Jesus stories. There are even false stories circulated about Jesus by the government. From the very beginning, the apostles taught their doctrine orally and written, according to Luke and according to history. And this is the culture that gives us the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is the culture in every synagogue is a library. This is a culture that Jerusalem has scribes and multiple libraries. Alexandria has multiple libraries, massive libraries. Caesarea, Ephesus, Rome. Throughout the world, there's libraries, books, and literature corrected. And Luke says there's countless narratives about Jesus within 25 years of the resurrection that date back to the beginning. Okay? Now, why wouldn't there be? Why shouldn't there be? Luke is not lying about his vast eyewitness sources to enhance his credibility. He's not trying to boost his credibility. So to suggest that Luke has 2 sources, or maybe 3, is to call Luke a liar. Liar Luke would be the assured results of modern scholarship. The toxic 2-source theory, the toxic Markan priority, is based on the supposition that Jesus and the apostles were liars and frauds. They have no actual facts or supporting evidence except for their opinion based in naturalistic bias. So I believe Luke before I believe Streeter. What do you say?
Yeah.
I would believe Luke before I believe anybody else, any of these guys. List them out. Lockman, Boltman, whatever. Konzelman, Debelius, Schweitzer, on and on and on. Streeter knows nothing. Streeter cannot see the kingdom of God. Romarus is the liar here. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let's review briefly just some of the possible sources for Luke's gospel, some of his many sources. First of all, he says he has many written accounts from eyewitnesses from the very beginning. And as we've seen, the church begins in Jerusalem and is filled with thousands and thousands and thousands of eyewitnesses in the whole country of Judea and ministers of the word. And Luke himself is an eyewitness of much of the Acts of the Apostles, as we've seen by his inclusion in the we sections. He's got intimate details about the nativity from Mary's point of view. Matthew has Joseph's point of view. We get into Mary's mind, we get into her feelings. The baby leapt in the womb, right? We have Elizabeth. Where does Luke get that? Mary could be alive right now. She was very young when Jesus was born. There'd be no reason for her not to be alive. Nobody knows when she died. Luke is also in relationship with James, the half-brother of Jesus. Do you think James knows anything about the birth of Jesus? Zachariah and Elizabeth most likely dead, but that story has been written down and moved forward by eyewitnesses. Why wouldn't they have written that entire story down? What do we know about Peter? We don't know that Luke met Peter, but Luke knows Barnabas, who knows Peter intimately. Luke knows Mark, who traveled with Peter. Luke knows Silas and Philip the evangelist, and James was in the upper room at day of Pentecost. And Luke knows Paul, who's very familiar with Peter. Mark traveled with Peter. Mark recorded Peter's teaching in his gospel. How close is Luke to Peter? One person away by the half dozen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Sources.
And just 6 sources right there. All speaking into Luke's life about what they know about Peter, what they know about early church, what they know about the beginning, what they know about Jesus Christ. Philip the evangelist was a source, obviously, for everything that took place in Acts 6, 7, and 8. He's there when they made their third missionary journey on the way back. They stayed at Philip's house. They stayed with Philip and Philip's daughters. Is Philip a source for anything? Source! Mark's the source. Mark and Luke are together in Rome. We've reviewed that. Mark wrote his gospel prior to this. I wouldn't be surprised if Luke, the big researcher, used Mark. Why not? We don't care. It's gospel, right? It's good. Barnabas is in Antioch. Barnabas travels with Paul. Paul travels with Luke. Luke is one person away from Barnabas. Paul, Silas, Timothy. Antioch is a major city. Luke is supposed to be from Antioch. It was a major crossroad for all missionary travel going in every direction except south, right? In order to go east, you had to go to Antioch. In order to go north, you had to go to Antioch. If you're on taking roads, it was a major thoroughfare. Every missionary traveled through there. Priscilla and Aquila, that whole story, he gets Acts, the whole story about their trip to Ephesus in Acts from them. They're in Rome when he is there in Acts chapter, at the end of the Gospel of Acts of the Apostles. So Aquila and Priscilla are there. They have this story where they interview Apollos and this whole thing about the church planting in Ephesus. Okay? They're a source. They're a source. And all these other people that traveled, we saw them, people that Luke knew on his road back, other people. All of these are sources. All of these are witnesses. All of the disciples that he met along his way. And then finally he gets to Jerusalem and meets James and the elders. And he says, thousands How many sources is that? That's a lot. He's in Caesarea for 2 years with his friend Paul, while he's in prison. Luke is there. 2 full years. What do you think Luke's doing for 2 years? Caesarea, Palace, Jerusalem.
Interviews.
What do you think he's doing with Paul in prison? Visiting with Paul, probably going over the narrative, writing things down, getting everything straight. They are working on this apologetic because Paul knows at some point he is going to end up going to Rome. The half-brother of Jesus. Who is closer to Jesus than his brother who raised in the same house? What better eyewitness source could you possibly have for the early life of Jesus than his brother? Yeah, and his mother. Public knowledge. There's all kinds of public knowledge about Jesus. There's the Jerusalem elders, which go back to the very beginning. There's other elders he's in relationship with. We looked at Agabus, who's been all over Jerusalem, an early disciple. Nason, early disciple. They lived in his house in Jerusalem for a while until Paul was arrested. Most likely Luke would be in and out of that house. They were in Rome for another 2 years with Paul, Mark, Aquila, and Priscilla, and everyone in Acts chapter 16 mentioned there. And all the Roman Christians that were saved during Pentecost went home. All right? Listen to me. We are asked to believe by this new modern theory, to believe that Luke, with his endless access to the earliest eyewitnesses and earliest documents, gleaned nothing from them. Nothing.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. There's so many sources for the Acts of the Apostles. So many sources. Philip, Paul, Barnabas and Paul, Agabus, Peter, Barnabas, everybody. Paul, James, the Jerusalem Council. James, again, the half-brother when they come into town. All the trials, Aquila and Priscilla. Luke joins him, obviously, here somewhere. Right here. Luke is his own eyewitness. So, is Luke a source? How many is that? Where is it? Oh, we're up to 3 now.
Yeah.
Good job, Streeter.
Yeah.
And then Paul's brother-in-law. There's a whole story that Paul's brother-in-law about this conspiracy to kill Paul. All right. So, how long have we been into this? Do we know?
Almost an hour, I think.
I
think almost an hour.
Okay, we're gonna stop here. Let's stop here, shall we? I have another section I'll do on the origin of the two-source theory, because the two-source theory goes from 2 sources to 4 sources, and then they just keep adding sources along the way. It's kind of interesting. So I will wait and do that next time. All right? So what I want us to see right now is the condition of the church today, whether you hold to the view, I don't know how it's possible. So this is kind of the way it is today. There's the Q, there's the M, there's the L. You know, they've got an R now. They've got a T. The Logia is thrown in there. They've got a proto mark. So they found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe seven in here, right? In no one's language is that many. And then these are source criticism, redaction criticism, and form criticism. Say this is where Mark took all of this and added all of these things. He added the apocalyptic, the messianic, supernatural, all the miracles, the resurrections, all those things. He added all of these forms. They are literary devices. Where he got them, nobody knows. These were picked up by Luke and Matthew, and they take the shape of their gospels. Luke after the fall of Jerusalem, and Matthew, God knows when. There's so much diatribe over there. So Streeter introduces his four series, the MLQ and Mark, Matthew, Luke, Q, and Mark. That's his four source theories. And then Mark is used by Luke, Mark is used by Matthew. Looks something like that. All right? So we'll end with that, and we can pick this up next time. All right? Thank you so much.